All right. Hello to everyone out there, past, present, future, who will check this out at some point. I'm here with Chris Russ. Chris was one of the participants in Die With Your Mask On #3, the 100 best superhero comics of all time. He and I were both list makers, along with 9 other individuals. And Chris, along with my friend Alex Eklund, and I were the sort of editorial committee that sort of crafted the final list from all their lists. And in fact, the impetus for doing this almost kind of rests with you, Chris, from a comment you made to me in an email. You talked about how superhero fans were almost better at canonizing superhero comics than fans of alternative comics, underground, other kinds of comics. But superhero fans, they've sort of been very good at thinking about what's good, what's not, what they like, what they don't, what's important, what's not. So when I came back to you with your own words and the idea of doing this list, what did you think of that?
I think, it's a big project. I think, you've said on some of the other interviews we've done with some of the other list makers that, I think we've made the best list of 100 superhero comics that's been done to date. And I think I would agree with that. It's a huge project. I was, a little intimidated by the scope of it. There's a lot of people who have made lists of best of superhero comics. But I think one thing that uniquely excited me about it is that you had just been coming off of analyzing in depth, getting your thesis in top 100 list making with the TCJ top 100. So you had methodology down. You had a philosophy about how to do this. You saw from talking to all those list makers, what had worked, what had maybe not worked, things you wanted to take from that. So I think it's kind of a cool, unique thing that somebody who's been in the weeds of learning, how to make comic book lists is now applying this to this to this list of superhero comics. So that was a cool idea, I don't think anyone else has ever taken the behind the scenes, the Comics Journal list making approach to this kind of content before. Probably because no one's ever studied that stuff in as much depth as you have before. And then making the list was a lot of fun. Some parts of it were easier than I thought, and some parts were a lot harder. So I can, kind of talk about my methodology if you wanted.
I would love to hear that. Yeah, I'd love to know your thought process.
Yeah, so I started, but I didn't want to look at lists of other people's top 100 or the consensus list at first. I did that later, but the first thing I did is, I keep a spreadsheet for years of what comics I've read and my own personal little rankings, not complex, but just to keep track of what I'm reading and how much I liked it at the time.
Sure.
And then I keep kind of a loose list of some of the favorite things I've read over the years. So that was convenient. I went to some of that stuff. And kind of pulled out some of those books. I also just went through all my short boxes of comics, went through all of my, books that I have on the shelf and pulled out stuff that I thought I might like, and maybe started with a list of 200 comics, something like that. And there's some stuff stuff I checked out from the library, stuff I've read online or stuff I've borrowed. So, tried to remember good stuff I've read from that as well. And then the biggest problem too is some of the stuff you've read years ago, you read it when you were a kid or when you were a teenager. So I tried to reread some of the stuff, but I didn't get through everything. And I think now, I wonder if you feel this way too. If I made the list now, it would be different, because one of the things I did to prep for this is that last night I read the first 5 issues of Hawkeye, because on some of the other streams you did with people, it was getting a lot of flack, and I was like, I read that comic as a caveat.
Sure.
Whenever it came out, which was I was I'm in my mid 30s, so I was 22, I think. And I had just had my first kid, and so I was very sleep deprived as well. But I think we can go into this Hawkeye in more detail. But I reread that last night, and I was like, this is more annoying than I remember it being. I still think it's very good. I still think I would have had it on my list. I wouldn't have had it as high. So,
sure.
Any of these projects is going to be an imperfect process. Even have changed by doing this what I think a superhero is and what it isn't. But so I started with that giant list of 200, just kind of started whittling things down, tried to reread stuff that I didn't feel I had a good grip on, tried to read new stuff that I maybe hadn't read before that's supposed to be classics. I didn't get through everything, but
sure.
And then the top of the list was, I felt pretty confident about, especially top 10, top 20. And then when it got beyond that, it at some point felt a little futile to try to how much am I thinking about my 75th versus my 76th best book? But actually, that end of the list was maybe the most fun to do because, the middle is kind of, I know this is good, but I don't really know exactly what I feel about it. The end stuff was stuff that I was, I don't know, 70 to 100. It's like, I love this book. I know it's very flawed and very imperfect. And I know it's not one of the greatest comics ever made, but like, I really have a unique affinity for this book. So like, just looking at my list, the DC Comics Presents number 97, which is like this weird Steve Gerber issue. It's either the last or one of the last issues of DC Comics Presents. There's Eric Haven's superhero comics, which crack me up every time I read them. I think they're some of the funniest comics that have ever been made. Martian Manhunter by Rob Williams, West Coast Avengers by Steve Englehart, which is like a deeply flawed, weird, of its time comic. But just as it's like very interesting time travel stuff. It's very soap opera heavy. It's kind of like, and there's a bunch of family dynamic stuff with the Vision and Scarlet Witch and all that. It's, it's almost soap opera in the way that Claremont X-Men is, but without any of the coolness, which I kind of like. It's this very weird, dry, nerdy soap opera. I've not read a lot of other comics like that. So that stuff I really enjoyed putting together.
Yeah. I had the same feeling. The top stuff I felt strongly about. The middle stuff I felt strongly that it needed to be on the list, or at least my list. It needed to be on my list, but I didn't think it wasn't enough to push it in the top 20 or something. But you really have fun in that last quarter of the list. And that's where I could get a little wild with some of my stuff too. I had some things on there like, speaking of Hawkeye, I had the Mark Grunwald Hawkeye miniseries on my list, which is a pretty corny comic. I mean, but it's one I read when I was young, and I've reread it a bunch of times over the years. I always enjoy it, even though I wouldn't necessarily make an argument for it as the paragon of the comics medium. Stuff like Wild Dog, Max Allan Collins and Terry Beatty. I reread that and really thought way less of it than I did when I was younger, when I really loved it. But I still thought it was interesting enough and odd enough. I wanted it on my list. And so I had it at 91, so just stuff like that.
And it really captures like that, specifically this like obsession with vigilante stuff that was going on in like the 80s, early 90s, but like pre-Image when it was really valorized and glamorized. Like the people reading it and writing it felt like they knew it was messed up. In the 90s, some of that stuff is like, oh, this is cool. And they're like, no, this is disturbed. Like, and it captures that zeitgeist very well, that comic.
Yeah. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. You were kind enough to tell me that you had thought about some things. Hit me with something. Let's go.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the, starting out with kind of the maybe bigger picture thing, Watchmen is the number one book. You've expressed that this is kind of a disappointment to you to some extent, even though you think it's maybe probably the best comic on the list. I was very disappointed by this as well. I completely get why it was. I blame myself because I think I had Watchmen somewhere. Oh, where was it?
You had it 31.
31. And I thought about leaving it off just because it's extremely well made. The Gibbons cartooning is some of the best cartooning I've ever seen in my entire life and, in any medium. But it's a very cynical comic. And in this, we're doing this magazine about super heroic adventure, the magazine about super heroic adventures, which I know is maybe a little tongue in cheek. But it's still a comic where we're talking about superheroes and celebrating superheroes and looking at them and explain. And it's just to have something that's a deconstruction and have something that's almost anti-superhero at its core as the number one book. I feel a little torn about that, especially because the Fantastic Four, which was the number 2 book on our overall list, was the number 1 book on my list. And I feel is like fully embodies like all that a superhero comic can be in its happiest, most genuine self. So it hurt me a little bit that it's like, if I just would have left it off as a protest vote, but that's not the process of list making. I was thinking about that. You've probably heard like if you have a jar full of jelly beans at like a county fair, and then one person guesses it, they're probably going to get it wrong. But if you have 100 or 1,000 people guess at it, and you do like the average of those guesses, you're going to be almost mathematically very close to that. So now, it's maybe not good for taste and ranking one jelly bean above the other jelly, but you get the gist of the right stuff. And I think that's what happened with this project. And the other, so a little bit of disappointment there, but I completely understand why that book, made it to the top. The other thing that I was thinking about a lot over the past few days is what constitutes and what does not constitute a superhero comic book. Because the thing that was bugging me is, obviously One Punch Man is on here, but a lot of other manga is not on here. People have brought up, Naruto or Dragon Ball Z, and I was like, I don't think those are superhero comics, but I was having a really hard time expressing why I don't think they are. And I like Naruto a lot. And I think I like a lot of other manga a lot. And I was trying to think in my head, the closest I could get was, well, I mean, it doesn't have the trappings of superheroes, like secret hideouts and sidekicks and masks and capes. I think actually that kind of is important a little bit. It's part of the convention, but that's also a dumb answer, which to your credit, you said don't, or whatever you think a superhero comic is, which I think is the correct editorial guide to give list makers.
Yeah.
But I did ask my wife, why this is bugging me. Why is it? Because she's a big fan of. She grew up reading manga. She we'll watch anime together. She reads fantasy novels, so she's kind of familiar with genre stuff, even though she doesn't read comic books that much.
Sure.
So and she thought it was that in superhero comics, pretty uniquely, there is like a before and an after. There is like an origin story, and there is a world, and in the characters' world themselves, something before they were a superhero and after they were a superhero. There's that origin story piece, and or the world had a time before there were superheroes, and then the time where there is now, it was not, and now there is. And a lot of the drama and the plot in these comics is around reacting to, all right, now that these things exist, or now that I am this. What is the tension? What is the drama? How do things shape positively and negatively in response to that? So thinking about Spider-Man, regular teenager, regular city, gets bit. Now he has to deal with these powers. Now the city has to deal with him. The newspaper has to deal with him. Villains come up in response to him, or maybe they would have come up anyway, but now he has responsibility. So which gets to this issue of identity that's really core in Watchmen and in a lot of these comics. And so that's a very imperfect answer still, but that answered a lot of my to me, that gets it a lot. Like if you're going to apply that filter to most comics, you're going to get a pretty good list of what is and isn't a superhero comic. I think there's outliers to that don't apply, but so this list also made me think a lot about that, like what constitutes a superhero comic.
I also took a pretty traditional view, even though for the purposes of talking to the list makers, I made it a very big tent and said, whatever you think. That's your business, and we'll see if anybody else agrees with you if you pick something really strange. But I took a pretty traditional view of it. The reality is that anytime anyone says, well, I'm surprised this isn't, or this isn't, I don't have a good, are the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles superheroes? I never once in my life considered them superheroes until this list, until people started talking about them. And then when you think about it, why aren't they superheroes? They're superheroes, right?
Yep. They have an origin story. They have a hideout. They have, a team. They have costumes. They got all this stuff that's,
villains, the whole bit. There's nothing about them. And then, but I was doing a chat with someone the other day on someone else's channel about this issue, and someone brought up, she was making the argument that the Turtles were superheroes, but then she said, but I never really thought of Hellboy as a superhero. And I thought, the thing is, all of these exceptions you think of, you can make an argument that Sherlock Holmes and James Bond and all these Zorro, all these people are superheroes. It really does become, it's hard to make coherent arguments. So that's why I kind of said it should just be in the eye of the beholder the best you can. For me, I was looking for things to be from a more traditional lens. And like you, with your thoughts about Watchmen, I thought I almost excluded all deconstructionist comics. Ultimately, I wavered on that and even ranked some pretty high because they are superhero comics, and many of them are good superhero comics. So things like Animal Man, Doom Patrol, V for Vendetta, Dark Knight Returns, it's kind of hard to argue that, I don't think Dark Knight Returns is really that deconstructionist, even though it gets that label.
No,
but here's another list maker here, Damien.
Yeah, Sleepy Reader. I've been watching his channel for years and years.
There
I think
you go. He's one of.
Are you going to do an interview with him too?
That's up to him. I'm trying to get him on. He's been busy. He's had jury duty.
Okay. Eddie the Office
Goblin
Goblin, I
superheroes.
would not classify as a superhero. I need to get
There you
back to
go.
drawing those comics. Thank you
Yeah.
for reading them.
But probably
Um,
somebody would classify them as superheroes if you let them go
yeah,
wild,
I'm
right?
sure they would. I think that general definition, people got it right in the aggregate. There's some stuff on the list, like Swamp Thing being as low as it is, I think is partially due to a disagreement maybe about how much of a superhero comic it is.
I left it off my list, and
I did too, because I didn't think it was.
See, yeah,
I thought Hellboy was, because Hellboy there's that origin story.
Yeah.
You know, he appears now. He's changed the world because he's here. He has like a headquarters and a support staff, like some of these superhero-y things.
Yeah.
But I could see the argument that he's not as well.
I think he's clearly a superhero.
Yeah.
I mean that,
and he's very inspired by superheroes. As a child, he reads I can't remember what the superhero in the Iron Lobster. I have not read it. I've not read enough recently, but he reads a pulp comic that he is inspired by in terms of.
Yeah, here's Damien says the same thing. He didn't vote for Swamp Thing. I mean, if those of us who are like me, I think Swamp Thing's better than almost all the comics on this list. If I had voted for it as a superhero comic, and you had, and Damien had, I mean, right, there's a good chance it would have been very high on the list. It still did respectably well. It's in the 30s, and that's with several of us disqualifying it. So,
right. And like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I don't know if in my head I don't think I thought of that as a superhero, but I can see the argument for that as well. So, and to the deconstructionist point, I did do like a count, and this is very rough, and there's gray on what is and what isn't.
Sure.
I classified it as deconstructionist, postmodern on one end, very genuine, straightforward on the other end, and then there's some that are in the middle. I did count like about 40 just purely genuine, straightforward superhero comics, and then maybe about 30 that were somewhere in the middle, and then a 30 that were somewhat deconstructionist, postmodern, tongue-in-cheek, and it's hard to say exactly what is and what isn't. But the Spirit's another one where it could go either way. I was actually surprised, because I thought it's a bunch of guys who grew up in the middle of like the gritty deconstructionist, but a lot of these are just genuine, straightforward superhero comics. Still, I think it's a good spread, a good representation of the different types of superhero comics. And then I think like one of the comic on my list that that I ranked the highest that did not make the final list is Kankor. And that's by Matthew Allison, which I think is an absolutely brilliant comic. And if I was also wondering if I could have like one, this is like a book club, and you can mandate you have to all read this one book, like not the universe, and not like a psychopath, but like if I could recommend to the other list makers one book, if we could all do that, I think mine would be Kankor, just because I think it's incredibly well done. I think it's deconstructionist, but not in a super cynical way. It's made in a very autobiographical way. He's talked about in interviews how he's been really inspired by even some like modern mainstream superhero comic books. So I think that's a beautifully drawn comic book. So I don't know if Damien would, because I don't know if I found out about Kankor from Damien, but he was definitely one of the people I know who've talked about it. So the other, I have a list of other topics if you want to get into it.
Please, let's go for it.
The one thing I did want to talk about particularly is Hawkeye. I had mentioned that. So, because I think you've mentioned in a number of your interviews with the other list makers, you're like, I like the book, all the comics on the list. I think they're all good comics. And then you kind of like flinch. You're like, Hawkeye is on there though. So if it might be your least favorite comic that made the final list. If I had to guess, I don't know if that's accurate, but
that might be accurate. There's a few I haven't read, so I can't throw shade at Jason Aaron's Thor or Jeff Lemire's Moon Knight, Silver Surfer Black. There were a few of the modern things I hadn't read, so I plan to, since they made the list. I would like to familiarize myself. I think the thing is with Hawkeye is I think the early issues are pretty defensible. I think the David Aja art is spectacular, and but I really think he's carrying a lot of water, and so us putting, I guess it was me who made this decision, but I put the whole run on just the Matt Fraction run. By the end of that, I was hate reading it. I thought it was just terrible. But those early issues, I can kind of like, I don't think they're as funny as he thinks they are, but I get what he's doing. It's fine. I just thought those were wildly overpraised at the time.
And I think they're very slick, cool comics. Like I said, I read them for the first time when I was like 22 or something. So I'm like right out of college. Like hipster stuff is very in vogue. It's like cool graphic design. Infographics are all over the internet. So I think about this comic, having reread some of it last night to kind of refresh myself on it. I do think the dialogue's way more annoying than I remember it being the first time through. I think, a little bit enthralled with the slickness of it the first time through. I do think that, part of it is the character's supposed to be kind of annoying, but also the character's supposed to be really cool. And I think the dialogue is fairly aggravating. And some of the plot points are annoying too. I do think the art's really great. I love Javier Pulido as well, who did a number of the issues. I think he did a couple of early issues and then an annual or two. I'm a huge Pulido fan. And I think Aha's art is really fun. And I think the panel layouts are really fun. The coloring, which I think is by Hollingsworth, is really effective and pops. To me, thinking about it, I think it's maybe similar to the Steranko Shield issues, which I love. I didn't list them because I didn't think they were superhero comics, but you read some of those, and some of it is kind of a slog, or kind of, maybe in the same way that this is caught up in this kind of quippy early 2000s milieu or 2010s. Maybe that was caught up in this kind of hippie, faux esoteric, the Steranko stuff. Stuff. But those comics are incredible to look at. I'll look at those comics all day long. They're beautiful, beautiful art, the Steranko stuff. So that's kind of how I classify it. So I still think it's a good comic. But yeah, I can see your point.
Yeah. For me, I have to be clear, and that's why I have sort of talked out of both sides of my mouth on a lot of these live streams, is because it's not like it's the worst comic ever made at all. I fully expected it to make the list. I wasn't at all surprised. I wish it wasn't quite as high as it is, but I wasn't surprised that it did well. And a lot of it's just me doing a bit at this point is something to complain about. It didn't make, I didn't put it on my list. I wouldn't put it on my list. But I don't know if I had to sit here with the list and think what the worst thing on it is. I don't even know if it would be or not. But so anyway, it's something for me to rag on, and a few of the other guys have the same opinion. But I think Damien's the guy who did the write-up, so hope he's not taking it. Anyway, it's a well-loved comic. I was not at all surprised.
And my conclusion, having reread some of it yesterday, it's just art's incredible. I think it's a good comic. I would have still put it on my top 100, but having revisited it, I just don't think the dialogue is as sharp as
Yeah, I'm not a big Fraction guy. I mean, I think the only thing I've read of Fractions that I've actually enjoyed is that Iron Fist he did with Brubaker, and I give Brubaker most of the credit for that. So and the art,
and the Aha and that art, is really good.
Exactly.
So the other, one of the other things you had talked, by the way, before too, I think the graphic design on this is incredible on this magazine. Speaking of graphic design, the watermarks on the back of each of the page must have been a ton of work to put together, and done very effectively. And I find myself, reading the text and then just looking and seeing some of these images kind of peering through. It's like subconsciously doing something, I think, to the reader's brain to impress upon them, these images. So huge shout out for that. I think it looks really sharp. Alex did an awesome job on that, I thought.
I agree.
So the one thing I heard you mention in another live stream is that nobody voted for Busick's Avengers Forever. So I didn't make it very clear, but I technically did. So I put Busick's Avengers, which I included all of his conventional Avengers run, and Avengers Forever. So I love those comics. I think Busick's. Yes, I think that's a fair point by Damien, who just said there. It was refreshing. I think that's a very fair point.
I also think that I can't remember who I was talking about with this particular comic, but we talked about there were other books like this around the same time, and this one has stuck in the memory, and others haven't. Like Hickman's Fantastic Four, which people loved and loved and loved, and nobody voted for it, I don't think, or maybe got one or two, weak votes, but it certainly didn't get enough to get near the list. So this has had staying power for a decade and a half, and that does mean something,
Yeah.
for sure.
Um,
Anyway, sorry, you were saying.
oh,
So
yeah.
so you were including all Avengers by Busiek together.
Correct. So the Avengers Forever with Stern and Busiek, and then also his regular Avengers run,
Sure.
volume 3 of Avengers overall. I think it's a really fun comic. I reread some of it, in preparation for making the list. It's obviously, it's very kind of straightforward superhero fare. Although Forever goes so deeply into the continuity, it reminded me of something like All-Star Squadron by Roy Thomas, where it's just like so. Very few things just in fiction period go so deep into themselves. It's it's almost like Bible adjacent, and that like this refers to this, and this is a prophecy of this, and this ties back into the. It's crazy. It's hard to think of movies that do that. It's one of the things that comics is very uniquely able to do, is this, because you can have little editorial notes right in the body of the
Sure.
of the kind of art itself. You can have, this is literally pointing to this. This is a reference to this character. And then you can even show a literal copy and pasted image from that other piece of media. It's almost pulling documentary art making into a kind of fiction narrative. But I think that those comics are incredibly fun. I think the artwork on them is really good. The Prez work is great on there. And yeah, I love Avengers Forever. And that, Pacheco, I think he did some incredible work. He had that sweet spot of his time. And I think I put his Fantastic Four run as well on my list. A lot of that stuff, he was colored by Liquid Graphics. It was LIQUID exclamation mark. It was like I assume it was a group of guys or some kind of design house or something. And that stuff can look really gaudy, but I think on the bright paper and reading a floppy comic at that time, there's something really appealing about that. It looks like candy paint on old cars. Like it kind of brought that aesthetic into a comic book.
Yeah, I did consider the Busiek run on the Avengers on the main title, but ultimately I decided to leave it off. But I had Avengers Forever at number 5, and I think I was the only person who voted for it besides you with a partial vote. I chalk that one up to other people not really having read it. I think people may read it and not like it. That's totally fair, but I think most people just haven't read it.
Yep. So what made you put it so high? Like, what speaks to you about that comic?
Well, in terms of straightforward superhero comics, not deconstructionist, not nostalgist fare, like a Marvels or something, or New Frontier. Those are very nostalgist. That's relying on that. Avengers Forever is a straight up, here's a straight superhero comic, no real bells and whistles other than just the adventure and the parameters of the book itself. And the fact that it all fits in 12 issues and is contained. And there aren't a lot like that. I mean, most of the straightforward superhero stuff that made the list were runs,
right. Stern's Avengers, for example.
Stern's Avengers, Levitz's Legion of Superheroes, like the really the 80s kind of Marvels or DCs that would have made the list. But it's a nice, just contained book. And I just think it's a really high quality superhero comic. I like Busiek. I don't know. I don't know if you heard one of the chats, one of the guys, Brad, he's, refers to him as Kurt Snusiak, and just is like completely immune to his charms. For me, I think Busiek's like pretty much kind of the apex of that kind of writer. I think he takes it seriously, but it's not Alan Moore seriously,
Right. Yeah, it's almost, and Avengers Forever, and then also some, like maybe the Roy Thomas also. It's almost like a hyper constructionist. It's like, no, we're taking everything. We're ignoring nothing. We're not recontextualizing. We're piling farther and farther on top of this. But if it's done skillfully, I think it's done in a very compelling way.
I agree. I don't usually care for Roy Thomas's work.
That's
the
other thing. So I have a huge soft spot for Roy Thomas. I think I put his Avengers on the list. Which I grew up, a huge nostalgia there. I grew up reading the black and white Avengers essential volumes, and I would read his stuff over and over again. I like Don Heck. I think I like his
Me too.
scratchy style. I think, especially when you've read some of his like romance comics or, the 50s stuff, he's pulling a lot of those chops into his superhero work. It's rare to see stuff that's that. You had the Kirby and the Kirby clones. You had Ditko doing his own thing. And then you had like the John Buscema kind of this realism school of comic book art. And you also had the DC style. But not too many people at that time were doing this very scratchy, and people hated Heck for that. But it was this, you're taking this kind of early 20th century illustrator approach and doing like super fast job of it. I'm not saying it's, the quality of those,
Sure.
Early 1900s magazine covers, but that kind of sketched out approach and applying it to superhero action. And I just think you get some impressionistic borderline stuff. You get some very fun, loose stuff, especially with the bright color palettes back then. I really love Don Heck's work. I think in a very loose way, it's a precursor to some of the John Romita Jr. stuff. I have no idea if John Romita Jr. would say yes, that's accurate or not. But just the way he slings ink is very loose and very fluid, and I think it reminds me of some of that 80s stuff where everything loosened up a little bit more.
Yeah.
Sure. And I do have a soft spot for just like the obsessive love of every little bit of superhero lore. That stuff gets really old really quick, but there's something very endearing about it as well. That's why I love Mark Grunwald. I think that's why his Captain America is so successful. And in my write-up for the Grunwald Captain America stuff, I said it was, reminded me of Don Quixote, where it's just this like this guy's kind of nuts, and he's like struggling in this industry, Grunwald, where nobody else wants to make any logical sense of anything. Nobody else cares about this stuff as much as he does. Nobody wants to fit all the puzzle pieces together. They just want to do their own thing and get the job done. And he's just like this man striving alone to like hold everything together. But with a lot of love, not out of just pure obsession, with a love for the content. And I find that really endearing.
Yeah, I think he's almost I don't want to say he's forgotten. They've been putting out omnibuses of his Captain America run, so clearly somebody's thinking of him. But he has been kind of a forgotten man in a lot of ways. His Squadron Supreme barely scraped in on our list, and I had that one. I had it at number 21. I had it fairly high. And like I said, I voted for Hawkeye. I knew nobody else would, but I did anyway.
Yeah.
Also, I voted for Quasar, and nobody voted for that either.
Quasar, I've not read the Quasar. I know Michel Fife has written on his blog about that book, all the Grunwald stuff, a lot.
Yeah.
So he's ringing the bell for all the Grunwald stuff to get appreciated.
Yeah. I would not go so far as to call him an auteur or anything. I don't think he quite gets to that level, but I do think he was an interesting. You kind of like Roger Stern, I guess. Roger Stern's another one who was just, I thought, very good at what he did.
Yes.
And he's not the sort of guy who's going to run out a whole bunch of standalone graphic novels that people are going to read over and over again. But he was a really good serial monthly writer. It's weird how he's been kind of forgotten and shunned almost. Yeah.
Talking about, Grunwald's legacy, I've also been reflecting, and thank you for writing that, the intro article about, the super instinct towards superhero canonization. And, you asked me if I had any further thoughts on that for the magazine. I couldn't think of too much else. I don't really know why superheroes have that instinct for that, superhero fans. I don't know if it's just the type of fans that are attracted to superhero comics. That's how their minds operate more. And they they like that instinct of, hey, what is the best and what should I be reading and what's your top 10 and what's my top 10? Like, I think that might be the psychology of it. But, to that end of the canonization instinct, I thought this magazine pointed out some very interesting things about maybe the direction that the legacy of some of these books is, the directionality of where they're going. And I think maybe this work, I'm not sure how many people are going to be reading this magazine. I hope everybody does, because I think it's really great. But, hopefully this will even reinforce some of these directions. So I think one of the big things that this magazine did, and it reflects an overall trend, is the establishment of Keith Giffen as like one of the greats of comic books, particularly of superhero comic books. I think there's a different path that his legacy could have taken. where he's very forgotten, maybe in the same way that, Grunwald or a Stern or somebody like that. I think there's a number of factors, that make him unique as a creator that would maybe prevent that from happening. But I think there's certainly a world where a couple people know about him. It's maybe closer to like a Trevor Von Eden figure, who's an immensely talented, like really great creator, but just not, for whatever reason, there's not as much awareness. But I think, this list, like in our, I don't remember how many Giffen comics we had on here, but
there were five Giffens.
Yeah.
And honestly, if once you look at it later, you're like, man, he probably could have had double.
Yeah.
If votes had just broken certain ways, right? Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have voted for 10 Keith Giffens, but I could see it. And he's an interesting case to me because I actually think you're talking about what if he had gone the other way and had become obscure.
Yeah.
I almost wonder what if he had been disciplined and had decided to make graphic novels and lean into being an auteur.
Yeah.
Could he have achieved at least like a Howard Chaykin kind of reputation? I mean, he's probably surpassing Chaykin at this point.
I was going to say, yeah.
But for many years, that wasn't true, right? It was Moore, Miller, Chaykin. Those three names got mentioned together a lot. Until it was obvious Chaykin wasn't really up to the other two guys. But Giffen, I think he could have had it in him to have done some pretty major work. And interesting work. Now, he wouldn't have just been the same regurgitation so many of these guys do when they get a chance. And I wonder, I don't know. I would love to know the psychology. He clearly was ambitious in terms of wanting to make a lot of work and stay busy and do lots of different things. But he didn't seem to have the ambition to want to, much like John Byrne, same way, a guy who was hugely productive and very popular, but never really thought I can make graphic novels. And then I would own them and they would get, I get turned into movies like Frank. He's watching Frank Miller do it. And it didn't occur to him to do it.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. And I don't know. Maybe there's a family situation where he's like, no, I want to be a provider and I wanted stability. Yeah. I don't know. I have complete conjecture. I have no idea because, he did little things like Video Jack or what, and a Trencher. And like, just look at a Trencher and it's like, this is one of like the most experimental comic books that's ever been created, at least visually. And I think to Damien's point, he just posted there, he's more of a collaborator team. I think he did love collaboration.
I do too.
And even just his approach where he would make the mini, which if anybody has some of these, or if these are in his like estate, or like the Giffen mini comics he would make, I'll say just in case anyone isn't aware of it, but when he was writing comics, he would sketch out on little pieces of, I think, printer paper. He would make little mini comics of what he wanted. And if you Google Giffen, mini comics, Giffen, visual script or something, it'll pop up. For as a guide for all of the artists on his books. And some of the writers too. So he's kind of making the comic on his own first as his little mini rough. I mean, he's very sketched out, very rough. The artist would go in lots of different directions with it, but you can see even when very different artists are drawing, it's like, oh, that's a Giffen angle, or that panel progression is a Giffen panel progression. So just his love of exchanging ideas with people, he clearly cared about the work. That's not the approach you take if you're just trying to like crank out work for a paycheck. You don't make a little mini comic that's going to get just thrown away just because you don't care. So I think, and if you look at where he's at in our creators with the most appearances, it's Moore, Kirby, Miller, Morrison, Giffen. Those are the top ones. And I think that's kind of where his legacy is approaching, maybe because of the lack of original properties or creator-owned work or completely original ideas, in terms of in terms of characters. He's probably not going to crack that, Moore, Miller, Kirby, Morrison realm. But I think he's, those are 1A, he's 1B. I think in terms of his legacy and superheroes, he's approaching that. I don't know if that's just maybe because he passed away recently. I don't think so, though. I think that's the way his reputation was trending even before his passing.
Yeah, I think you're right, because Austin English was tweeting about him pretty regularly, just random comics. And then, of course, Fife has been talking about him for years. And I don't know if you've been watching Fife's videos. Have you been
I've seen some of them. So
yeah.
I started watching them or listening to them when I was like doing chores around the house, and I was like, I need to sit down, like study this
Yeah.
like it's a text that I need to
Yes.
memorize. So they're in my YouTube Watch Later playlist, and I've started working through them now.
Yeah, I honestly think they might be my favorite thing I've ever seen on YouTube that's
So
comics
good.
related. Just the level of detail and the exhaustive level of his collection is incredible. Because I've had the idea, I already have a bunch of Giffen. I thought, maybe I could kind of collect all of Giffen stuff. And then you quickly realize I'm never going to put in the time and effort to collect all this stuff.
Yeah.
I'll go for the big stuff. I'll go for the little issues here and there. But he has every single thing. And of course, having an artist talk about it is another layer of, you know, just
he has way more insight than I have, you know. Well, and I think people talk about Giffen's eras as if, you know, they're kind of, I don't know, like, oh, this is when U2 made their dance album, and now this is when they make their, you know, their return to rock and roll, or this is, you know, this is when Dylan went electric, and there's these like hard cutoffs or something. Mm-hmm. And I think that what Fife is, you know, showing everybody, this is sometimes he will make drastic changes, sometimes in the middle of an issue in terms of his style. But these are things that are evolving very slowly and very organically, and he's pulling in these influences, and he's chewing them up and then, you know, reconstituting them in different ways. This is not a hyper gimmicky, he's doing this, now he's doing this, now he's doing this. It's a very organic evolution that displays a love of the craft, you know, and a mastery of the craft as well. And in terms of his art, in terms of his penciling. Yeah, I wonder how many. I'm looking up now how many Giffen books I had on my list. I think it could have been way more. I think I only had 3. And I kind of regret that now. I think if I would have dug in more. So I had as one the 5 years later Giffen. I had the Justice League International stuff with him and DeMatteis, and then his Dr. Fate miniseries, which I think are my 3 favorite Giffen works.
Oh, nice.
Which I think I love that Dr. Fate era of Giffen. I think is really, you know, he kind of expands his panels more. He's doing these big giant blocky shapes. It's you know, it's great. I love every era of Giffen. I even love his early Kirby clone stuff. I think that stuff is really fascinating too.
Yeah, Damian brings up the swipes, you know, and I recently went back and reread that article in the journal. It's in Comics Journal 105, the same issue they cover the Kirby art campaign. And it's pretty damning. I mean, you know, not just that he had kind of appropriated Munoz's style, but it was flat out complete reproductions of panels and backgrounds and images. And, you know, his the executive editor at DC, Dick Giordano, he defended Giffen, kind of said, well, you know, as artists, sometimes we sort of, you know, have images lodged in our head and they can kind of come out. It wasn't very convincing. And I think Giffen meant it. I think he meant it in an affectionate way, but I can kind of understand the outrage at the time of him sort of, you know, copying someone else's style. But I also don't think he did that for very long. No. He was a chameleon, as you wrote about. Is that in Die With Your Mask on number? Number 2. You wrote about his, you know, phases of his style. You covered 3 kind of distinct looks, and he probably had, I know he had several over the years. You know, and he would go back to looks, right? He would sort of turn back around and do a style he had used a few years before, and then like you said, Trencher's like, what is this? It's completely different.
And Trencher's I wonder. Again, I don't know the psychology, but I wonder if that's like, oh, you think all I can do is copy? I'm going to create something that literally no other human being has ever done before, and make this into a comic book. Like, it's literally the most original penciling you've ever seen in your entire. Okay, how's that? You're gonna keep wondering if I'm going to swipe people, like. And, you know, I think Giffen's defense at the time, I almost just wish, because it's like in his, you know, anytime it's on his Wikipedia page, it's the Munoz stuff. It's just all, and, you know, I don't know. I have very mixed, because if I'm in Munoz, like, I'm going to be upset about that. Like, and I completely understand that.
I think he was.
Yeah. And I think Giffen at the time said, these are pages I was just staring at all day long, and I didn't intentionally trace any. And so who knows if that's,
Yeah.
what. But I think he took that stuff and then went in very interesting directions with it. He didn't just like steal the panel, and it wasn't thematically copying what in terms of the plots of the stories. And in some of the ambush book stuff, there's jokes in there that, oh yeah, I am drawing in this style now. Now I'm going to my Kirby style. Now I'm going in this, like. And so it was. And I think that was pre the scandal that he's like, oh yeah, I do just grab stuff, and I think it's just an omnivore's approach to comic creating. Where it's like sampling in music or something. I'm grabbing that, and it was a blues riff that I stole from here, and this is a breakbeat that I'm stealing from here. But even in the 5 years later stuff, it's post the Munoz accusations, and he's taking these kind of blocky, inky, dark things. But he has this whole thing where he's doing these faces with just these dark triangles, and they work. And this is in superhero comics, and he's fixating in these panels on just rubble and smoke, and very unclear what's happening at different points in that comic. And it's very just evocative of mood, and he does not care at all about clarity. He does not care at all, but he's still telling like a very good, very cohesive story, very plot driven. It's just, I think he takes these other styles that he's inspired by and does completely novel things with them. I think he's incredible. I think he's an absolute legend. I think he's one of the greatest pencilers and writers that we had ever lived in superhero comics. And I'm glad. I think his magazine is both the earlier issue that was focused on him, and then also this issue helps to continue to push that agenda.
Agreed. I wanted to just mention that both Giffen and Giordano at the time pointed out that style was unpopular. So it wasn't like he was doing it to enrich himself, because he was more popular when he had a cleaner style. He's not like Rich Buckler, who was accused of plagiarism of Kirby and was guilty of it.
Right.
Was doing it to make money. He was doing it to be more marketable and to do Kirby's characters. But here's a Damien comment. In the long run, he absorbed Kirby and Munoz to great effect, and I agree. I think he really synthesized his influences. Here's Gore Vidal, one of the great YouTubers. Giffen was the reason I read Legion. I remain enchanted by his work, and I agree. I loved him when I was a kid, and I still do.
And as a fan, and again, if I'm a creator who is being plagiarized, I would be upset and like, hey, you're taking my ideas. But as a fan, I find mimicry and theft in comic book art very fascinating. So even like the Buckler stuff where he's taking swipes from Kirby or whatever, even if it's not direct, I don't know all the background on that. It's like, okay, he's doing Kirby stuff, but he's doing it in these like small panels that Kirby would never do. And he's taking parts of the Kirby that like don't fully capture the Kirby genius, but so I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting when Herb Trimpe does his wacko 90s stuff. I think it was great when John Romita Jr. for those 2 issues of Cable is like, okay, you want me to go full image? I will go the most image approach that I can possibly do and fully incorporate that into my style. Barry Windsor Smith did his Kirby thing in those early Avengers issues, and it's weird and it's not really complete, and it's like his pre-Raphaelite stuff. You can kind of see little peaks of it coming through. I think the mimicry stuff is, as a fan of comic book art, really fascinating. I find it very interesting myself.
Yeah, here's Damien echoing your thoughts. This will make me sound yet again like a hater. I've never found anything interesting about Rich Buckler at all. He's not the worst, but
like Sal Buscema doing Simonson stuff, the Simonson style. Yeah. Like I don't love all of that stuff, but it's like, whoa, that's kind of cool. Because Sal, when he started out, it was like he's kind of copying his brother, and early Sal, it's like he's copying his brother to some extent, but he can't really do it exactly. So it looks like action figures that looks literally like action figures that are posed. And I think that really early Avengers Sal Buscema stuff I love it because of the stiffness. It's this it almost reminds me of, Ogden Whitney stiffness, where it's just like so artificial and tight that it becomes compelling again, especially with the coloring on those old Avengers. I kind of like mimicry and copying and that kind of stuff, just from an interest perspective.
Sure. So you brought up Whitney. I think you and I were the two Herbie voters.
Yeah.
We sort of, crammed it onto the final list. Where did he come in at? Number 87.
Where did I have it on my list? Let me see. I had it 14th.
Oh wow, great.
Which may be too high.
That's awesome. No, that's awesome. That's great.
I love those comics so much. I think there's something just absolutely maniacal about how funny and weird they are. Like, I'll give those comics to my kids, and they like die laughing. They're some of the most profound. Like, I'll have a Herbie. Yay, okay, great.
Yeah, okay, thanks, David. I'm glad to hear it.
I'll have an issue of Herbie lying around the house. My wife will be see it, what is wrong with you? What is this? More disturbing than any violent comic or TV. Just this is something profoundly incorrect about this.
Yeah,
and very knowingly by the creators. I think they're intentionally creating something funny and weird and other and distressing. I think that's an intentional decision by the creators.
Yeah, one of the hardest things to do, I think, in any art form is to be weird and not have it feel like it's a put upon, forced weirdness. And those Herbie comics really do pull it off. They're some of the oddest anything you'll ever see. But you never feel like, oh wow, they're just trying to be wacky. It really does feel like surrealist stream of consciousness almost. But it has that flat effect.
Yeah, everyone's it's just everyone's on is overly medicated or something. There's that one quote I use in my write-up for Herbie where the villain's stealing kidnapping the Statue of Liberty, and Herbie's just she's a woman, not right. So it's this old, he's being chivalrous kind of, but it's wrong because she's a woman. And Herbie's father is a monster. He's an absolute nightmare. Just so emotionally dead and disconnected, and his son is obviously superpowered and distressed. And it just it's so odd. I don't even know if it's referencing. I mean, I know it's referencing superhero comics and kind of making fun of that, but some of the other things is I don't know if this is a reference or is this just genuinely originally very weird content.
I think it is. I mean, I'm not an expert. Maybe someone would pop up and say no, but I think it has its reputation for a reason. But it's fairly obscure at this point. I mean, I know Dark Horse put out collections quite a few years ago, but
it's sort of single issues with John Byrne backups in them.
That's right. So weird. So weird. Yeah. It's the sort of thing you would hope would get reprinted every generation, though, so that more people would just have a crack at it. You don't ever expect it to be a seller that stays in print, but some company would be like, "Here's a big book of Herbie. Check this out."
Yeah. This reminds, I don't remember who said this. It was somebody who was talking about why nobody takes comic critics seriously enough or seriously at all. And it's because I think it was something on Twitter a long time ago. So it was because you'll ask a comic expert what the greatest comic of all time is, and they'll say Little Lulu. And if you're foreign to the genre, you're what in the world is wrong with you people? I feel the same way about Herbie. And I love Little Lulu. I think it's a great comic. But if you're this is the great, and they're all right, well, your brain's broken. That's
Donald
not the correct answer. Citizen Kane at least looks okay, I can see how that's hard even if I don't like it. But Little Lulu just doesn't seem as serious. I think that similarly to like my personal list, where the top was kind of, I feel very strongly about this, and this is pretty locked in. The middle was like good stuff, but I don't feel it strongly. And then the end is like, this is the stuff. This is the good stuff to some extent, even though it's flawed. I kind of felt the same way reading through the magazine, where I think a lot of the stuff that's like, I have not read that and I want to read it, or just like, this is fun. Like, why did you put this on the list? Like, Invasion making the list is awesome. Thank you for that.
I'll take the blame for that. Yeah. I had Invasion number 3.
Okay. Yeah. That's see that hey, you got to do what you got to do to get it on the list, I guess. But I think you genuinely like it. Like, it's not like
I do. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Like I said, I went pretty straightforward for my choices, and then I did sort of like I said, I put the deconstructionists on there, but I did sort of punish them for it. Like, I put Watchmen at number 100 as almost a protest vote. Like, I couldn't leave it off, but at the same time, even though it's my favorite comic probably ever, and I do think it's better than every comic on our list, I didn't think of it as being superhero-y enough to coin a term. And so Yeah, like so you said Kankor was the first one you had on your list that didn't make the final list, and it was, I think, number 14 on yours.
Yes. Yeah, 15, I think. But yes, yeah, very high. Yeah.
My number 2 choice didn't make the list.
What
And
was your
that
number
was
2?
JLA Avengers.
Oh, see, I haven't read it. It was out of print forever, and I haven't. Didn't it just get reprinted or something?
It's about to. They're about to re-release it
Okay.
as facsimiles. And I think that's the thing. No one's read it because it's been out of print for so long. I think a lot of people would read it and go, okay, it's another superhero comic. They might not care. I think it's like the apex of a kind of straight-faced. Well, we talked about Kurt Busiek doing Avengers. I mean, it's basically him throwing the kitchen sink in.
And is it George Perez on art as well?
Yes.
Who I love.
Going whole hog. I mean, he includes every single character you can think of, and they really go for it. I just think it's a lot of fun. I don't think it ends up as constipated as a lot of comics that try to do that where they, like Crisis on Infinite Earths is not a fun read, because they're
and on the, talking about like, okay, where is the canon of superhero comics moving, stuff that's moving on to it. Keith Giffen has ascended. I was shocked by some of the things that didn't make this. So Crisis is one of those. Secret Wars, which I think for a long time people have not thought that's a particularly good comic. They just think it's,
They have. I voted for Secret Wars at 24.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Because I think it's dumb. It's dumb, but it is fun and it is well made for what it is.
Okay. Yeah. See, I think I've read very little of it when I was a kid or so. Like I'm not familiar enough with it. So maybe I should reread it then.
No, people hated it when it came out, though. They thought this is big and dumb and who cares. That to me is kind of the argument in favor of it, actually.
Yeah.
Because crossovers just got worse later. I mean, at least Secret Wars, it's all contained in one comic, 12 issues. That's it.
And I think some of the people who like, because I found a Reddit post, I didn't double check his work. I didn't look for his source material, but he said he went through some like insane number, 650 best of comics lists. So if there's some Reddit post that'll come up when you search like, best of comics meta list, I think is what it was called. So he said he compiled 650 best of comics lists, just bulk, and then looked at what was on there. And there is a lot of stuff that we had that is on there, but there's a lot of stuff that isn't. Obviously that includes non-superhero stuff. He wasn't just sorting for superheroes, but so Sandman, which some of that I think is because we don't consider it a superhero comic. I think that's part of why it didn't make the list. Other stuff that was really high on that meta list, Long Halloween, is not, I don't think, on our list at all. I don't think there's any.
Yeah, I don't think it's good. That's why I didn't have it on there. But
I have a soft spot for some of the Tim Sale work, but I have not read what little of the writing I've read from that. Miss Marvel, the G. Willow Wilson stuff is not on ours. Gotham Central, which kind of surprised me. I thought Gotham Central might make ours.
I think people forgot about it.
Yeah, Astonishing X-Men, which I know there's, kind of similar to the Sandman. There might be some like, okay, well, the person who made it, there's some, I don't know if that people are taking that into account. I like Astonishing X-Men. I know it's very flawed, and it's kind of maybe some of the quippy dialogue flaws similar to maybe the Hawkman. But I like Cassidy's art a lot. That's why, one of the reasons I like Planetary so much. I don't think we had any Bendis on our list, which was shocking to me.
I voted for his Daredevil.
Okay, that was the one that was really high on their list was the Bendis Daredevil. No Garth Ennis on our list, which I don't know if
thank God.
Don't I don't know if that's just because people don't think isn't there a lot of guys in Comic Journal over the years that are big Ennis supporters? I remember.
His Punisher and his Nick Fury have had lots of talk.
Yeah.
And that's probably the stuff I would have groaned the least if that stuff had made it. But if the boys had made it, I would have been so embarrassed.
I'm a dispositionally like happy person, and the boys just makes me like hurt too. I just don't like it. It just makes me feel bad reading it, but not in like a way that like Herbie or Kankor or something does, where it's like fun, but it's just
I don't mind getting dark. I just find it to be a very 12-year-old's version of getting dark.
No Jeff Johns, I don't think. Like Green Lantern by Jeff Johns. So I don't know if that's just reflective of the list makers now, or if that stuff is gonna like peak and die out. I'm not sure, but
I think you might want to file that under the Fraction Hawkeye. Except the Hawkeye lasted, and I don't think Jeff Johns. I think people have already moved on from him. He sold a lot of comics, but you never hear people going, what you really need to go read is Jeff Johns' Aquaman or something.
Right. And I don't know. And Mark Millar, I don't think made the list, which is another one of those like huge, big money, like big made those lists forever.
True.
And then some older stuff too, like Infinity Gauntlet did not make the list. What else did, Craven's Last Hunt,
Yeah.
Civil War, which is not that old, and but the Green Lantern, Green Arrow stuff, like the 70s stuff didn't make the list. Very little 70s stuff at all, actually. But.
Yeah, I was surprised some of those accepted classics. I think the Neil Adams Batman made it and did very well. It's like number 25. But yeah, the Green Lantern, Green Arrow stuff didn't make it. I think that stuff does not hold up well outside of Neil Adams' art, which is great. I want to do a couple comments real quick, and then I'd love to get back on this with you. Yeah. But Gore, did Penny Century make the cut? No Gore, but Jaime Hernandez's God and the Tie Girls did make it from Love and Rockets. So there was a Love and Rockets representative. Here's Chris, who was invited to do a list, so he can't complain that he is about anything. He said he gamed the list with his Watchmen placement. You made this comment before, Chris, and I did not game the list because it still ended up at number 1. Yeah.
Can't have gamed it that effectively.
Yeah. I guess maybe if I'd left it off entirely, maybe there would have been an argument for Fantastic Four, but that was the only way. Also, Chris, Secret Wars is unreadable. Knowing what Chris likes, I got to say, can't take that seriously, Chris. Sorry. That's why I wanted Chris's list, because I knew I would disagree with it vehemently. But I wanted a list like that I would not think. Here's Gore again. Secret Wars didn't age well for me. Crisis, on the other hand, is fantastic. I feel the exact opposite. I find Crisis to be pretty much unreadable. I love Perez's art, but Secret Wars is simple enough and dumb enough that you can just sort of enjoy reading it. Here's another. Say what you will about Secret Wars, but it gave us the Beyonder, which in turn gave us the greatest dialogue in the history of Marvel. Slap me a piece of the porgy on the fry side down. It's from my friend Josh here. But yeah, the Beyonder, not a great character. And Gore, once again, Punisher Max and Nick Fury by Ennis are great. Yeah, that's the stuff that I would not have been surprised if it got on the list. Yeah. But I was surprised it didn't have any support of any kind.
Yeah. And there's some more recent books that I thought, like I don't think any Scott Snyder made the list either.
No, not at all.
And I was shocked by the lack of Hickman on the list too. I thought that actually legit, because I understand why people don't like it, but I liked his Avengers stuff. I think that's the one Hickman book I had on my list. I read it
before.
No, I like his. I mean, I'm a big Avengers fan in general, so a lot of nostalgia for just the Avengers and the characters. I think the Fantastic Four stuff, I'm very precious. I love it's like if your mom makes something and then you love it so much that you don't like anyone else's version of it. I kind of that way with the Fantastic Four to some extent, where it's like the Kirby. I've read the Kirby stuff so much, and I hold it in such high esteem that I get possessive a little bit when other people try to do a take on it. The Avengers, I think the earlier stuff is, which I still voted for the Jack Kirby Avengers, and I like the Roy Thomas Avengers, but I think that stuff is inherently flawed in a way where I don't feel as precious about other people like getting on it.
Sure.
But no, I think his Avengers is very flawed and is hyper decompressed. I read it, I think, digitally. It was when I had like little babies and I was staying up late to like take care of them. So I'd just be on the couch, like looking at my laptop and clicking through like panel by panel. Like, so I think that was maybe the proper way to read Hickman's Avengers, where it's all just like flow state, like half absorbing into my brain at like high volumes on a screen. And it sounds like an awful way to read comics, and it probably is, but it made a nice impression on me when I was doing that.
I kind of thought the whole House of X, all that stuff, just because it did make such waves when it came out, I expected it only got a vote, I think. Maybe 2 weak votes, not enough to make it get on the list. But his Fantastic Four was so popular at the time. But once again, it just sort of faded, I think, from people's minds. And that's another one that starts off pretty strong and fades very hard, very fast, which doesn't help with some of these when you think about them.
Yep. And but kind of going over that list of stuff that like was very popular on a lot of other top lists, but didn't make our list.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of the stuff on there, like, Civil War, Identity Crisis, Batman Hush, Marvel 1602, like, I don't know if we made any massive missteps in leaving that stuff. I think we kind of captured something fairly accurately.
I think those are all bad.
Yeah, like I don't think yeah, and I haven't read all of them, so I don't, I've never read Gotham Central. I've heard good things. I like Brubaker,
I like
so I
Gotham
might,
Central. Yeah.
like there's some of these things we left off that we maybe, if everyone would have read this, it would have been on there. But yeah, Brubaker, Captain America, I don't think that made it on. That's one I was surprised by as well.
Me too. Yeah, I voted for that as well.
But I think in general we kind of got it right. Like I don't think it's like, oh no, we missed something, and we're like, stuff like that. It's a personal thing, like Kankor. Like I think that's a great book, but most people haven't read that. I get that it's a very personal book for me. But these kind of big things where a general community is going to look and like, how in the world did you leave this off? I think we did pretty good by that metric at least.
I agree. I think obviously there's things people can point out, and even like Gore just said, Punisher Max and the Nick Fury stuff. Like if those had made the list, you would have been like, okay, those are well-regarded comics by a name person and good artists. Same for some of these other things we've mentioned, these big hits. But I don't think that any of those would disqualify a list in people's minds just because they didn't make it. I think we kind of got the big stuff. And in fact, I was telling someone that I thought the top of our list ended up a little more conventional than I was hoping for or thought it would, and he told me that that basically I shouldn't worry about that we got out of the way the stuff you have to get out of the way, and like you couldn't have a list that didn't have Dark Knight Returns and Frank Miller's Daredevil and Claremont Burns' X-Men without people would be really quibbling if you left that stuff off or if you put it at like number 97, So we got that stuff out of the way, and then we get into the nitty gritty, and there are some that are much higher. Like people have expressed surprise that OMAC was so high or top 10, so we do have some things that are sort of idiosyncratic, that are rankings, but I don't think we have none of the rankings are embarrassing. There's not, other than as we've discussed on several of these, Hawkeye being ahead of Swamp Thing.
Right. Sometimes the direct juxtaposition of one book right above or right below another one, that can look like, what in the world are you guys doing there?
But that's every list that's ever been made. I mean, the fact is Hawkeye got the votes. And it slotted in, and that's just as simple as that. And we know why Swamp Thing didn't do better, but I mean, if you were to actually ask me like to make a list of these comics in order of what order I thought they were the best comic, it would be a much different list.
Right.
But we were making a list of superhero comics, and so while I would have Watchmen and V for Vendetta, at the top. I would have had Animal Man at the top, Alan Moore's Supermans. These are things I would put on an all-time list. But I had to weigh them and how they would go against other superhero books. And if this sounds like we're just sort of, moving a bunch of nothing around to get it more nothing, that is exactly what we're doing. That's what lists do,
Yeah. And I think at the very least, like this is 100 very interesting comics. I mean, there's going to be personal taste where if I don't particularly like this book or that book.
Sure.
But I think if you're picking up this magazine, you're like, this is 100 comics and some of this stuff, probably very few people have read all of this. And there's these great write-ups with every single one, which I think the write-ups are incredible. I think a lot of people did like really novel insights in a lot of these write-ups.
I agree.
And I think there's like, Damien who's on the chat. Like, I think his write-ups are like, very original and fresh and authentic. And then there's other people who write from a very like different writing approach where like, whose did I read today or yesterday that I thought that was really good? I don't know. Jeremy's writing style is really great. I don't know. I love Brad's writing too. Like there's so many great writers in this magazine as well. And you kind of get to know them as you're reading each of their blurbs. It's like, I was reading them. It's like, oh, I bet this is this person. Oh yeah. I would like wait to look at the credit at the end. So you get a sense that this is a real like group effort, which it is. And I think you've talked about this in previous videos, very little like moving around of spots. It was like, okay, the votes and where stuff is at. if there's tiebreakers near the end and we have to slot something in, we'll be forced to do that. But this is very little like editorial, like, fixing of the list to make stuff work.
Much less than the original journal list. Where Gary Groff told me that they weren't really that hung up on it if they felt the need to move something. If something was an outlier, they weren't going to just go, well, it got that many points. They'd go, no, one person voted for it number one, and that's not enough. We had 11 people, so one person being at number one, it wasn't enough to generate points to game the system.
There's 2 books, right, that got number one votes that didn't even make the list. I think
make the list,
right, and that wasn't because we're going to punish that. Like, it just like organically didn't make the list. So.
Just on pure points and pure number of ballots, which I consider to be the most important criteria. But we, it wasn't until the last 20 or so that we really had to make decisions. Before that, it was really about just picking tiebreakers and
this person said Spider-Man, all of Stan Lee Spider-Man. How do we count that versus a vote for just the Ditko Spider-Man? We're doing a half vote or like that kind of stuff.
But
I thought it was interesting, speaking of the journal list, to look at the books that we had in common. I don't know if you did that, but I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books in common between the 2 lists. So they had The Spirit at 15, Fantastic Four at 30, Plastic Man 32, Ditko's Spider-Man 35, Captain Marvel, the Beck stuff at 79, V for Vendetta 83, Fourth World 88, and Watchmen 91. So I thought that was interesting just to see where the overlap was with their list as well. I was surprised. I've obviously read, your issue summarizing it. The Spirit being that high, I think that's maybe the thing I just personally disagree with the most. I'm not a huge fan of the Spirit myself. I get his cartooning. I think those splash pages are really cool, but I don't know. I've never been struck by the Spirit in the same way that some people are.
It wouldn't be that high if they did the list now. I mean, I think at the time it was still the 20th century, and Eisner loomed fairly large. I think it's still considered his best work by most people, but there's a bunch of stuff in that journal list that would slide off the list altogether. Who's advocating for Lil Abner at this point? It's that thing would just slide right off the list, and not just because Al Cap was a terrible person. I think just people don't read that strip, I was interested too. I was wondering, you can't say commonalities because there's barely any superheroes on that journal list, but they all did very well. They all, they're here.
Yeah. If you say the Spirit's not even a superhero book, their highest superhero book was our number 2 pick. So there's a continuity there, I guess, to some extent.
True.
Plastic Man, speaking of things that are kind of becoming stat, I was shocked by how high Plastic Man ended up on our list. I think that's really awesome, actually.
Well, I don't know if you remember this, but that was a point of debate when you and Alex and I were putting the list together. Because due to tiebreakers, it could have been anywhere. I think it ended up at 15, and it could have probably been anywhere from like 15 to 19. It was like depending on how you count ballots, And you and Alex pushed for it to go higher. I would have pushed for it to go lower. But I was happy to defer. It was very important for me in this process to not be the guy who's just ignoring other people's opinions. I really wanted it because of course you want that, right? You want, I think this, so it's got to be, but I really wanted it to be a group effort, which is part of the fun and all of the frustration. Here's a comment from Chris. I think I just prefer all the 80s British authors, not so much Frank Miller. I share that, even though I like 80s Frank Miller quite a bit. Gore Vidal, I think it is hard to pick the top 100. I would find it very challenging. It's admirable you took the challenge. Gore, I almost sent you a request to do this list. I didn't know whether you'd be interested or not, but you were definitely on my list of people I would have loved to have seen what you have said. Chris, who did not make a list. I got to 30, then didn't want to read ones that I should have and haven't read, which I totally get. I did. I put a embarrassing amount of work into making my list. It was fun though. And then Gore Vidal asked, "Did Lee Falk's The Phantom make the list?" The Phantom is one of Gore Vidal's preoccupations. 0 votes, Gore. Nobody voted for The Phantom, which is too bad because we only had one newspaper strip. I would have been nice to have had Miss Fury, which is fairly obscure. It would have been nice to have had some other things considered.
Yeah, my the only interaction I've ever had with the Phantom is there was if you remember the Sega Game Gear, it was like this little handheld, and there was a Phantom game on that. I had no idea who he was. I had zero context at all. This is purple guy. I was terrible. It was a very difficult game, but and the other part of the exercise was really fun. Is just like, okay, I'm going to look at every single comic in my short boxes and, like, oh yeah, I haven't thought about Seth Fisher in a while. Like Seth Fisher's incredible. Like his art is so good. I haven't, there's this one issue of DC Comics Presents. I wondered if I just read, this also made me want to read just like every issue of DC Comics Presents, which is probably a fool's errand, but like there's an issue of it's like Jack Kirby does a story and Alex Toth does the other story. It's like a halfway through. And it's just like, this is incredible. And it's like a later issue too. It's 84. And it's like Alex Toth and Jack Kirby in one, and I got it for, $1 in some beat up bin somewhere. It's just unbelievable stuff in there.
Phantom Erasure.
The Phantom's one of those books that's hard to get in because it's like there's 100 different collections, and I've looked online, on eBay at like, oh, should I pull the trigger on a couple of Phantom volumes, but I don't know where to start. I don't know if it's all good. I don't know. So if you have a recommendation, like, is there a key Phantom story?
That's I think, and Gore could answer this question. I think the Phantom is bigger in some other countries than it is here. Obviously, it was a big deal here 80 years ago, but I think maybe they're still putting out collections and things in Mexico and some other countries. So it's more something people would see, whereas with us, it's like we just know it as an old timey character. Right. I would also like to know what the best version of the Phantom is.
Yeah, it's a very definitive Phantom story. We should all.
Yeah.
The only thing in our top 10, I was thinking about that. I think you said this in some of the other videos before too. Like the fact that everybody is somewhat unhappy with parts of the list mean it's a good list. Like if there was one like too strong personality that just tried to like take control of the then most people would hate it because it would just be that one person's vision. But so this is not a criticism of the list making process or anything. I'm just not a huge Chris Claremont fan.
Sure.
And so the Uncanny X-Men being 7th, I think also I'm just, this is again the proximity thing. I love Jack Kirby so much, and just seeing like this, comic which I hold in lower regard, like directly above one of my like favorite comics of all, which I think is like an incredible work of art. Like that just bothered me a little bit.
I was stunned that the Claremont Byrne X-Men. Not that it made the list. It would have been a no-brainer for it to have been on the list. I'm stunned that it was that high. I would have just thought that it's been a long time, and I just thought it would have faded in people's minds, and it would have been further back along with the Roger Stern Avengers and that kind of stuff.
And I thought it was going to be one of those descending titles.
Yes.
And it just wasn't at all.
It also speaks maybe to the demographics of the people who made the list. I mean, you might be the youngest list maker. You're on the younger side.
Yeah.
So for those, I mean, I had it on my list. I don't remember exactly where I had it. I had it at 28.
Right.
Which I think is about right or lower. Maybe anywhere from 25 to 50, I would have gone like, yeah, sure, that seems about right. But I was stunned that it ended up at number 7.
Right. And I don't dislike it at all. I mean, it's a fun comic. I've read those issues. I'm also just partial to the early Romita Jr. I think that stuff's really raw and fun. The Uncanny X-Men stuff by Romita. And, I really like the Paul Smith stuff too.
Yeah, I got a couple votes.
Yeah, and the Cockrum stuff is great. So like, I think, and I like Byrne, but I just think that some of those other cartoonists I just personally prefer a little bit more. So maybe that's coloring my opinion of it too. But
here's the generational divide writ large. Chris hates the Claremont stuff. He loves Age of Apocalypse, which is awful. So just
I haven't read that stuff. Yeah.
I actually haven't either. I'm just messing with Chris. That was right after I quit reading the X-Men. That was right when I was like, I guess probably when they shit canned Claremont, I maybe lasted a couple more issues, and after that, I was like, I'm on to Image now, and then I grew out of that pretty quickly too.
Yeah.
Here's Gore giving us the dope on the Phantom. Published in Australia, Sweden, and India. Different writers since Lee Falk died. Unfortunately, the Australian comics don't have a distributor here. I ordered them from Australia. Interesting. This is new material, huh, Gore? I've seen him do videos on his channel about the Phantom, but I never really knew what I was looking at, to be honest. I just knew that they were Phantom comics, but I didn't know really what I was looking at.
This is like how Europe gets their own like Duck comics, like
right?
Disney. So maybe 30 years from now, Fantagraphics is going to be publishing Australian Phantom comics and be like, you don't even understand. This is the good Phantom artist, like the good Duck artist. This is the good Phantom artist.
Yeah. Yeah, here's Chris having it both ways. He knows Age of Fox is awful. Claremont fan defends like a Tolstoy. It is true. I think, Chris, though, a lot of that is nostalgia, right? The Claremont Burn X-Men. I mean, it was a legitimate phenomenon when it was coming out, and that was before my time. I mean, Claremont was still an X-Men when I was a kid, but when him and Byrne were going, there were literally lines around the block at comic shops. That's hard to imagine now, and so I think that it just has a long tail on it where people just remember it for the rest of their lives.
And people go back to it because people get into the X-Men through various channels, and then they always do go back and start with the start of the Claremont run. And there's there's podcasts, there's I've seen like Twitter accounts that are like the Claremont run. It's like an academic study. It's somebody who's doing an interesting like analysis of the text of the Claremont. So it doesn't seem like it's going away, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, when I was probably still a teenager, I bought a kind of a academic book about superheroes, and it covered Watchmen, Dark Knight, and Claremont's X-Men.
Wow.
Which is clearly like the oddball of the three, but it loomed so large.
And then now years later, it's 1, 3, and 7 on our list. They've all. I did. So that academic was had us on to something. I just even looking at the creators. I mean, of our top 10, it's Morrison had a book, Claremont had a book, Ditko had a book, Moore had 2, Kirby had 2, and Miller had 3, which I think is a pretty good spread of like heavy hitters in superhero comics.
I was a little bummed Miller got more than Moore in the top 10.
See, I'm not a huge Moore fan, and I love Frank Miller. I thought about. I was like, I'm not going to be a weird person. I thought about putting his. I don't even remember what it's called. Oh, the Holy Terror thing. Just because I love that era of art. But it was I'm not gonna. I was like, should I put it at 100? Just it was like, no, I'm not gonna do that. I have that on like the top shelf in my house where the kids can't reach it. I'm just afraid they're gonna like see it. And like, should I throw this away? And it's like, I don't know. That era of art is pretty fun though. It's like this weird forbidden text that just sits in the dusty top corner of my shelf. But I kind of love even those mini comics in Dark Knight 3 or whatever it was. That it was like just some of the weirdest superhero art. Like I kind of just appreciate. And even those are the covers he's doing now, which every time they go out, everyone always just is like, "Oh, Frank Miller stinks." I like those. I genuinely like a lot of that stuff.
What do you think of Dark Knight Strikes Again?
I love that I think it's the best 100th pick. I think it's perfect at 100. I did not put it on my list. I think I actually only had 2 Frank Miller books. I had Dark Knight Returns, and then Batman Year One. I could have put a lot more on there.
You only had 2?
I did only have 2. That was one of those ones. It's like Ditko. How many Ditko? I had 6 Ditko books, which maybe
you were.
I don't know.
Ryan Curie were the 2 big Ditkos.
Yeah. I love Steve Ditko so much. I should have probably put more Miller on there. I think I was like, I'm going to pick my top and then take it easy after that. I did not do that with Ditko or Kirby. I think for Kirby, I had, is this correct? I think I had 19 Kirby books on. No, sorry. That's in my write-up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I had 15 Kirby books on, which is probably too many, but there's also a way of looking at it where it's like, I think he's the greatest of all time. And there could have been a world where I had 40 Kirby picks on there.
Here's Gore saying Elektra Assassin and Born Again are my favorite Millers. Both made the list. Gore. Miller was on here 8 times. And like Chris just said, 3 of the top 10. I see if his Daredevil had been substituted for Born Again, I would have been a lot happier. I think Born Again's way better, but it is what it is. I love Electric Assassin, but more for the art. I think that's totally fair. Gore says, with more, it's V for Vendetta and Miracle Man. Miracle Man made our top 10, which is kind of a surprise to me.
Yeah.
And then, like you with Kirby, me was Alan Moore. I voted for 10, and I thought, man, that's kind of excessive. And then 13 made the list.
Yeah, even more.
Alan Moore titles. I actually had the feeling with Kirby. I was like, I wonder if there's a little too much Kirby on here, which I know sounds sacrilegious, but I thought stuff like Eternals, a couple of these are like weaker Kirby's basically.
Yeah. But I love Eternals, but I threw in even in my blurb, like the Incredible Hulk stuff was like at the end of that run, it just got weird and ham-fisted in there. And I think somebody, I don't remember if this is FIFA or if this is on Kayfabe, they would always say like, they voted for comic of the year. Like, as long as the Hernandez brothers are still making comics, why do you even continue to hold this competition? Yeah. That's like kind of how I feel about Kirby to some extent. It's like, well, is there another Kirby comic? Well, that's going to be better than whatever this other comic is. I'm just so hyper biased. It's like when Michael Jordan just should have won the MVP every year. It's like they just got tired of voting for him, and so other people won it. It's I think when you have your like favorite artist like that, it's really hard to break away.
Were you surprised at all by the Ditko comics that made it? It was Amazing Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Mr. A, and Shade the Changing Man.
I think that got it pretty right, honestly. I was pretty happy with that. I mean, the Doctor Strange and Spider-Man, those are the two, like the big superhero things that everybody likes. I'm a huge advocate for Shade. I put it at number 6 on my list.
You did, yeah.
I legitimately
made the list, though. I mean, it had the votes.
Yes, yeah. I think that's a really, really great book. Before I've thought it's his best work over Spider-Man. Okay. I think it's very imperfect. It's very short. It was cut off too early. It doesn't get to tell something complete in the same way he did with his Spider-Man work. But I think the writing's better in a lot of spots than Spider-Man is. Artistically, I think it's way more innovative and way more interesting. The coloring on those first 2 issues, I said this in my blurb. I think her name is Liz. I'm probably not pronouncing her last name, Berube or something like that. Unbelievable superhero coloring. It's just this like these. It's like the super normal stimuli thing where it's just this like hyper blues and greens, and it's really rich, and it's really beautiful work. And thematically, the Ditko fingerprints are all over. Ditko reminds me of Giffen, where it's like, even if he's not listed as the primary writer, it's like, well, this is clearly a Giffen book, or this is clearly like a Ditko book. Because it's all this stuff. You could just think about that book for forever, where it's, he has powers that like manifest moods and emotions. It's the reality that's going on behind the scenes, the emotions, the metaphysical that's happening is made physical. Stuff that's pretending to be revelatory is actually further deception. So there's all this meditation on what's real and what's not, and what's good and what's fake. But he maintains this like hard line of Ditko. Optimism is a weird word to use, but it's just like his virtue, his clinging to some value or meaning in the midst of this chaos. I find that really admirable in his characters and in his comics. Even if I don't agree with every philosophical concept, I don't think that matters for my like enjoyment of his work. In one of the blurbs, it's one of the few things I disagreed with, in some of these blurbs. I can't even remember which book it was, or somebody said that, I think it was in his Mr. A, it was a precursor to some deconstructive superhero stuff, and I don't know if I would agree with that. I know what they're getting at, certainly with that. I don't think it's an insane thing to say, but I think it's so anti-nihilistic, the Ditko stuff. It's like hyper anti, which is the whole thing, like anti-truth, and it's just he clings so tightly to his ideals and his virtues, which if you talk to people who talk to him in the Marvel offices, like later, they're like, yeah, he was into different streams of liberalism. He wasn't like this like nutcase who couldn't talk to you. I think he just enjoyed, I don't know. So his stuff about him being some recluse who has obsessive philosophies, I think is a little bit overblown.
Well, yeah, he wasn't a recluse at all. He just didn't want to give interviews.
Which you hear these stories like, where people would like go to his house and like, I don't want to talk to that guy either. Like, why would you want to be bothered constantly? So, so I'm pretty happy with the Ditko that made it on there.
Yeah.
I think it's a good cross section of his work.
It's true. Yeah. I didn't really know what else I would argue should have made it. It's just, he's such a titanic figure and he came below Giffen in the number of titles that were on the list.
Right.
So, but I think you're right. I think we got it right. Gorvidal says about Miracle Man. Wow, it made top 10. Up until a few years ago, most readers couldn't find it. Pretty cool. That's true.
Yeah.
And then he asked about did Matt Wagner's Grindel make it? No Grindel. I was a little surprised by that. I think that also suffers from it being from 40 years ago, and the bloom is kind of off that rose. I think a lot of people just haven't read it, or
Yeah. I picked up a few odd issues that haven't gripped me, and that might just be because I picked up the wrong random, dollar bin issue. And
yeah. I think he is a superhero. I think Grindel could count as a superhero, so could Mage for that matter. But I think a lot of that 80s independent stuff just didn't do very well on the list. Nexus made it, but Zot didn't make it. Megaton Man didn't make it. Some of the stuff I think if we had made this list 25 years ago would have easily made the list.
Yep.
Just people have forgotten about things, moved on.
I think some of the other things that shocked me about the list, Animal Man at 11. I'm not a huge Animal Man fan. I can see why. I know why people like it, but
I had it number 7.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I was surprised it's that high. Like, I know that people like it. I know why people like it.
I can't believe it was higher than Doom Patrol. I mean, Doom Patrol is the one everyone always talks about.
Yeah.
Though I do think Animal Man is better, and so I was heartened that it was higher, but I was very surprised. I thought, Animal Man will make it in the top 50. But
so
I wonder if
know
that's reputation has just grown over the years, and we didn't.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I haven't heard like increased buzz about Animal Man. It's always on these lists, and but I haven't. And who knows if I'm seeing the right stuff in the YouTube or online about what the consensus is about Animal Man. So I don't know if that was just a reflection of the 11 people we had voting on this, but it just surprised me it was that high. I thought it would be on the list. I just didn't think it would be that high.
Sure. Yeah.
What else? And there's some other books, like you said, as soon as you get out of the top 10, I mean, the book top 10 at 13, Supreme at 14, Heroica at 17. I mean, that pretty quickly you get into like, this is not typical. This is not your Hickman, Jeff Johns, Brubaker, like the stuff that normally populates the list at that point. None of it's there, and there's very different stuff in its place.
I think top 10 is the first real big shocker at number 13. I think I was surprised by some of the other stuff. But as I said, I was surprised by Claremont's X-Men being so high. But it's not a stunner, right? I mean, you're like, okay, this is something we've been hearing about our entire lives.
And Animal Man is like, this is going to be on the list. I'm in no way, even if it's as higher than I thought it would be. But top 10 being on there at all, especially that high is.
Yeah, I have had multiple people tell me that it's their favorite Alan Moore comic because it is fun and kind of a comedy and just really lighthearted. Very approachable, and it's contained. It doesn't sprawl all over the place. I like top 10 a lot. I didn't vote for it anywhere near. I had it number 37, so I actually had it higher than I would have guessed. But I was not surprised by Supreme. King Hell Heroica, little surprised, but honestly, I think entirely justified. I think when he finishes that, which hopefully, knock on wood, he lived long enough to do it. He's very close to finishing the whole thing. I think it's going to be regarded eventually as one of the great masterpieces of comics, and certainly of superhero comics. I just think his approach is so completely different. I almost wish that a book like Brat Pack wasn't part of it because it's so different in tone. It's so much more kind of hateful than the rest of it.
So Brat Pack's actually, I've never read it, and Brat Pack's the reason why, because I've just read a synopsis or read a little bit of like, this isn't for me. I don't think you'd enjoy it.
And honestly, I think it's the weakest part. And I like Brat Pack. I do. I liked it when I was young because it was sort of edgy, and it still has things to say that are decent. But his whole vision of superheroes, I think, would appeal to you in the way that he sees them.
He engages seriously with the idea of what a superhero is.
Yeah.
Is that's based on what I've read about it.
Yeah, he sees them as aspirational. He does. He's trying to tap into something that he thinks is primal. And the one, which also made the list pretty far back, but I'm really glad it made the final list. Number 85. Yeah, I think his approach to superheroes is just different from really anybody else's.
Well, and that sounds, maybe that would appeal to like my Ditko sensibilities, because that's, Ditko does that too, where it's like, this is, like it's an aspirational thing. There is, you know, this is a kind of rejection of maybe a mediocre life, or a life with no decisions or no consequence. You should be aiming for something real. So, yeah. Animal Man was higher than Doom Patrol.
Yeah. He also asked about American Flag. Yeah, American Flag might have gotten a vote or two. I
didn't think it was a superhero comic, so I didn't.
Me neither.
Okay.
I think of it as a action, sci-fi,
kind of futuristic pulp kind of.
Yeah, and I like American Flag a lot, but I just didn't think of it as a superhero comic.
The other thing that I thought was really pleasantly surprising is OMAC at 20. And I wrote that in my blurb as well. I was shocked at that. It's an incomplete comic that ends it doesn't really end properly. And I love OMAC. I put it extremely high on my list. I put it at number 8. I think thematically it's one of the most interesting things that Jack Kirby ever wrote. I love him as a writer a lot. I think he's a very, very underrated writer. I mean, hopefully that perception's shifting. I know that there's been a lot of writing done, by members of this, people who made this list about his Pacific comic stuff. I think that's one of the things in terms of shifting a canon, that his specific stuff is becoming well regarded, I think.
Ryan Carey's the one-man band. Really,
Ryan Carey's great with this. Those blog posts he's written about Kirby's Pacific is so good.
I was surprised. I don't think OMAC is the best Kirby, but it might be my favorite Kirby. It was the first thing I was able to read the whole thing, because it's only like 8 issues, and so I was able to read them all. I bought the issues in back issue bins when I was a kid. They were affordable. You could do that. And I really, really enjoyed it. I was also surprised it was as high as 20. Can I ask you about something that didn't make the list? I didn't expect it to. What do you think of John Byrne's OMAC? Have you read it?
I have not read it. No.
Okay. I reread it to make for the list, and I liked it a lot more than I did when it came out 30 years ago. And I put it on my list, even though I
always see it in back issue bins, and I've never pulled the trigger on it, which I probably should. I think the thing that stopped me is I really hated his West Coast Avengers, because the Englehart West Coast Avengers, it was very flawed, but it was very he loved these characters and it's family and these are sibling, and then there's a lot of romantic, and then he comes in and he's just like guts everything, which I know he's doing on purpose, but it's just like he's just trying to make the reader upset or be edgy. It's in his own way, and I think it just like put a bad taste in my mouth. And it's like I love OMAC. I don't know what he's gonna do with it. I don't want to find out. Like
it's he doesn't quite do that. It's very stylish. It's in black and white.
Yeah. They pop out when I flick through the bins and I see him in there.
Yeah. Great covers. And, he's really going for it. And he loved Kirby, of course. He revered Kirby. And I remember once reading in some interview with him, and I wish I could remember where it was, but he said, I heard Kirby didn't like it. Damn it. And Kirby probably didn't even read it. He probably just looked at it and was like, this isn't for me. But it's a pretty tight little story. Anyway, just a little digression into Byrne's OMAC, which is was better than I remember it being. Yeah,
I'll definitely have to check it out. The one thing I was thinking about in terms of the canon shifting for superhero comics is I was wondering if we did this exercise again in 20 years, or some comparable group of 11 people who are also well read in comics in general did this. What do you think would shift? Like, do you think, what things will completely fall off? Will there things that'll be resurgent, or things that are going to be I know it's impossible to know, but it was just interesting to think about that. Like, do you think it will be drastically different in 20 years?
I think so. One thing I think that a lot of the 80s Marvel and DC, the regular titles, Claremont's X-Men, Nocenti's Daredevil, Stern's Avengers, Grunwald's Captain America, the Levitt's Legion, it's really hard to read those things, right? They're never in print fully. If they come in print, they're going to go out of print because there's only so many omnibuses to go around, and they just go away. I think that's what happened really to a lot of the 70s stuff. Because of our ages and because of the availability, it's not easy to get a whole run of Master of Kung Fu, You could have 30 years ago because they were cheap in back issue bins, but now you can't. Now even the
omnibus, Steve Gerber stuff, which was no Gerber on the list.
Yeah, no Gerber, which Ryan Carey was outraged by. And I think the 70s guys are super overrated in general. Shout out to Chaos and Comics, who likes my bit where I complain about them all the time. But I do think they probably should have been more represented on the list. But I think they've just faded. And I think the other things that were in regular monthly comics will fade even more. It would stun me if the Claremont Byrne X-Men would make it, if you had a bunch of list makers, not maybe make the list, but make it as high as it did. If you had list makers that were 10 years younger and you did it 10 years from now, I just think there's no way that stuff's on their radar. I also wonder, and that the same logic would apply probably to Miller's Daredevil, the regular monthly comics. I think stuff like Born Again, Batman Year One, and Dark Knight and Watchmen, that stuff's going to be in print. It's going to keep getting read. But a lot of these things I think will just sort of fade away. And same for a bunch of these independent titles too. I think things like Prophet, Stardust, it really depends on how much they're kept in print and how much people can read them. They just don't have the cultural strength of something like a Watchmen does. But I'll be honest, I don't know that the top books, I think the same spirit would still apply, which is that these evergreen things in print will keep doing it. I do wonder, I think Kirby and Ditko will suffer over time for the same reason. It's just, it's hard to go to a reader and say, you should read Kirby's Fantastic Four. It's 102 issues plus annuals. It's not all good, right? It's like the beginning is really kind of sloppy. And
I love the beginning, but it's pulp. It's pulp comics. It's pulp adventure stuff. It's very different from what it becomes. It doesn't hit its stride. And then that middle period is kind of the worst. Like after the first 10, when it's not pulp adventure anymore, but it's not fully set. That's my opinion, at least. Like, and then the art hasn't fully opened up yet. Like he's not starting to hit the big 4-panel pages and the splashes and all of that. So.
And it's him and Sinnott really cooking. And then, but even the end of the series, Kirby quit creating things on purpose because he knew he was done. And that just means that stuff isn't as going to hold up as much. So it's tough to say everybody should read issue 40 to 70. Whereas like the Ditko stuff is discreet. You can kind of fit it in a book or two. The
Ditko thing is weird because he's so hard to read broadly. Because the Spider-Man and the Doctor Strange are pretty persistent and, like you said, discreet. But even like Shade is difficult to pitch because it ends abruptly and incompletely. All of his independent stuff is weird. You can recommend, he has this one issue of Man Bat that I voted for. That's great, but it's like it's just one issue and it doesn't conclude with anything. It's he has a lot of stuff like that. It's like the Alex Toth thing where. It's like, well, he doesn't really have that many good runs or cohesive things, but he's one of the greatest cartoonists ever. And if you like his chop, like it's just difficult to pitch him unless you're an inside baseball kind of person.
It's very true. Yeah. And so I think when it comes to making lists like that, it's tough when people just can't get their arms around it, But I do think, more modern stuff would make the list, right? I mean, it's come up a couple times in these chats, like the Absolute stuff, which is massively successful right now. But
I haven't read it. I've heard good things about the Martian Manhunter and the Batman. I see images of all the time, but I don't know if I've heard any like critical stuff that I've made.
Same here. I've heard the same stuff, and I think that's the sort of thing that will it last though 5 years from now? Will people care 5 years from now? You brought up guys like Scott Schneider and Jeff Johns. These guys are hugely successful. Mark Millar, I think Millar is probably hurt by the fact that most of the list makers were old enough that by the time he came along, we weren't interested in what he was selling. And
I like some of the artists, like he does the kick-ass stuff, right? And that's John Romita Jr., who's one of my favorite artists of all time. But this stuff I've read, I'm just not that compelled by in terms of the writing. So
same here,
And it's not Romita's best stuff. I mean, his Daredevil, I think, is his best stuff. incredible. So I think that the other thing that I would hope that would grow over time, although it might fall away because it's an indie thing, is Fife's Capra. Like, I think the fact that it scored as high as it did, and I know a couple people just hadn't read it. They mentioned in there talking to you, and I think one person even had read it and now, or had read more of it and would vote for it even higher just in the subsequent 6 months or whatever it is. So
Sure, yeah.
I don't know if that's just because we all were reading it when it was coming out and you're following Fife on, Instagram or whatever. And so we're all fired up about it, but I think it's a great, great comic. I love it so much.
I don't know if you saw this. I sent him the issues though.
Oh yeah.
And he posted about it on all his social media.
Nice.
But he was happy to be on the list and enjoyed the issue.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I agree. He's a guy who's going to keep making work, right? So even if he goes into different areas, Copra is still gonna keep getting reprinted in different editions, and people will be able to read the whole thing and discover it.
And I think he's savvy to that too. Like, he's putting out the hardcover for the second hardcover volume now. I'm sure he'll keep it going. It seems like he thinks a lot about publishing and having a long tail, and so I think it's not just going to die off, I don't think, anytime soon.
Yeah, he was smart enough to end it too. Like, that's one thing. Like, something like Nexus had its day, but it kept going, and it probably shouldn't have. I mean, they probably should.
Nexus is like the Phantom for me. I don't even know where to start. I'll see a random issue, and I don't know. The art looks great, but I don't. Yeah. I just literally don't know if should I just start from the beginning and go, or where I should.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, just the beginning's good. I mean, anything with the Steve Root art's kind of worth looking at.
Yeah. I think I was really happy, with the list overall. I think we did an incredible job with it. I was trying to think of anything else that I voted for that didn't. Oh, the one thing that was sad about is no Silver Age DC. I have a huge soft spot for that stuff.
Yeah.
I love Gardner Fox a lot. I think I'm very compelled by his writing. I think it has this very fairy tale kind of logic where if you're reading it and you're like, just suspend all disbelief, just kind of go with the flow of it. It's really wonderful. I think no Dick Sprang on the list is really sad. He's an unbelievable superhero. And we talk about people like being copied or mimicked. Like, I've never seen anyone who really draws like him, in a superhero context.
But he gets homaged all the time.
Yes, you're right. Right.
Yeah.
But then in terms of internal artwork and panel, it's and I think Mike Sikowski is one of the most underrated superhero artists of all time. That guy would draw just people from any angle. And there are these angular little quick dashed out shapes in those old Justice League comics. And he's just like the consummate professional. It's when those old guys all came out of drafting schools and they all could draw incredibly fast and incredibly well. And they just all had the unbelievable chops. He's like a guy who's in some backing band of a, blues session musician or something where he could just play anything you ask him to. I love Sikowski. And so I think it's sad that those Justice League of America and even some of the Golden Age DC stuff, like I think some of the stuff, Dr. Fate's really great. The old Spectre stuff is really great. I think there's a lot of fun stuff there as well. But I get why I did make the list. It's not tragic, but
it would have been nice. I mean, it's I wasn't going to vote for any of it, but mostly due to lack of knowledge, not necessarily because unfortunately a lot of the Golden Age stuff that becomes available is sort of early Batman, early Superman because of the characters. Yeah. And the stuff just isn't that great, No. So the more idiosyncratic stuff that was interesting, we don't get that as much. And of course I haven't taken the time to search it out either. But,
but it's difficult to find the stuff that's in print, and then some of the one good thing that is in print is the world's finest stuff. Because some of the Sprang art is in there, just in general, some of those world's finest stories, which is very surreal and odd and really incredible, I think. But and then just some weird stuff that didn't make it. Like Mark Badger, I don't think we had any Mark Badger on the list. I think he's a really talented cartoonist. I voted for his Martian Manhunter miniseries, the DeMatteis stuff. I don't think any DeMatteis.
Just JLI.
Right. Okay, so that did make the list. So we got that in there. I'm looking I love John Romita Jr. I legitimately think his Cable, the 2 issues of Cable, the cartoon is so much fun. So not ethically powerful, but just the raw power of those. It's nuts. Trying to see what else here.
Have you ever read the Joe Casey, Jose Ladron Cable?
Yeah, so I didn't vote for it only because I haven't read enough of it. But the issues I
Gotcha.
do have are unbelievably good. I
Yeah, I
also
voted
love
for it. Yeah.
the Soldier X stuff that came after that.
Hmm.
Who was that by? I've
Yeah,
again
that's.
only read a few random back issues.
Uh-huh.
That was, oh man, who did that art? It was one of the guys who was on the new X-Men run as well.
Okay.
Um, Igor Kordy, who's
Oh yeah.
unbelievably good.
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
great European style stuff. Yeah. Uh, Javier Polito is, like I said, a personal favorite of mine, and I don't know if his work, except for outside of that, well, the Hawkeye stuff did, but
Yeah.
I think his She-Hulk run's really great. I think he's just a very unique artist in general. Did we? Oh, yeah. In terms of the '70s stuff, I think the '70s stuff there are some like little gems, but you'll be reading a whole run and it's like Drek almost, or just rambly, and then it'll hit. I don't know if they're just on the right combination of, whatever substances were got like, or sleep deprivation, or what was going. But you'll just read one issue, and it'll just blow your socks off. So the issue I put on my list is Jungle Action number 13 by Don McGregor and Billy Graham, and the Don
Yeah.
McGregor pro sometimes is nuts. And that story, like everything's synced up and locked in, and the Billy Graham art is unbelievable in that
Yeah,
issue.
Billy Graham's amazing.
Yeah, he's so good. Yeah, so I think there's fun stuff on my list that I kind of wish would have made it on. I mentioned Seth Fisher is not on there. Michael Zulli, I voted for an issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He did.
Yeah.
I think Zulli's a really incredible artist.
Same.
But I think overall this stuff was kind of tertiary. I completely get why it didn't make it on. I don't think we had any huge misses, which I think is pretty impressive to say about considering how many superhero comics have been created. I think it's pretty good thing to say. Do you have, now having talked to a lot of people about this, is there anything that's like stuck in your craw about this, or anything bugging you? Is there anything that, like, hey, if I could have done this process over again, I would have done it this way or that way? Or are you anything like that?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I wouldn't have really wanted more ballots, because the calculations become more and more hard.
Yeah.
Frankly, you just start to think, okay, there's a lot of these things to deal with. It's already hard enough trying to not make mistakes and miss things and count things twice. You're trying to really be careful. One thing I would have done, and this is something nobody will care about but me who did this, is that I probably would have given, well, I wouldn't have even given tighter instructions to the list makers. What I would have done is, when I got all the ballots, I would have gone through and sort of rewritten them in a standard format on myself. I wouldn't have put that on everybody else, but I would have done it for myself. Or I would have given everybody a template and said, fill in your stuff. That would have made my life a lot easier in the compilation stage.
Got it.
The only real problems we had, and this was something I sent emails to you and Alex about, was the split votes. They voted for, King Hell Heroica. I think Ryan Carey might have voted for it in 4 parts, or 3 parts. And it was like, well, how do we do this? It shouldn't. So I think we would just make decisions about math. Okay, we'll average them here, we'll combine here, and try to not game the system in any way. Just try to figure out the fairest way to do it. So something like, I want to say like Kirby's Fantastic Four.
Some people voted for just like the Galactus part or something.
Yes. Yeah, Damien did. Damien voted for maybe a couple of different parts. So, so there were things like that where we just had to make judgment calls on the math. But I don't think that any of those were really compromising. But it was illuminating. It did show how hard it is to try to put this together in the fairest way possible. And I just sort of look at the whole thing as more art than science. I asked a few people that did not make lists, and that's fine. Like, I'm happy with who we got. We didn't even have a round number, and that's fine too. It was basically, I didn't want to ask 30 people and see what came back. I knew some people would not do it, would not want to. But I'm very happy with the diversity of the list makers. I mean, we're all guys of a certain window of age, but the diversity of viewpoints, it's all very different. and even like Gary Usher is one of the older list makers, and he had a list that was full of undergrounds, golden age, mini comics, alternatives. His was the most different list of anybody. I bet he got the least amount from his list onto the final list. I never did that math. I kind of wanted to, but I was sort of done at that point. I just I don't really want to go dig back through these and see how we all did. But I am curious, to see.
And for me as a list maker, seeing everybody else's list is one of the most fun, because that gave me a lot of, because the stuff on the top 100, I've read a lot of it, and the stuff I haven't read, I kind of know why I haven't. I mean, there's some stuff I do want to read on there, but people's lists, especially the second back halves of all these people's lists, where it's just stuff I haven't even heard of, just random back issues of things. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to check that out, or I'm going to add that to my list next time I'm back issue digging. It's fun. It's fun to see all those.
Yeah, it really is. And once we're this long-awaited website that Alex is working on in his spare time, which hopefully will be done soon. If we'll probably go around and ask everybody, are you interested in having your list up? And we might put everyone's lists up who's interested in sharing them. Because obviously we weren't going to devote the space to it in the final issue, but it might be cool just to dig through people's lists and say, oh, what did he have at 85 here? That's odd, There's some real surprises, right? I mean,
I think there's something fun that came from the fact that people were like, I don't know what else to put. Let me just look through my long box. It was a fun one. Let me throw that. And then you're getting some really insightful stuff. It's not normal stuff that you see on these lists. So
yes. Yeah. It's definitely not a wizard list. It's not a wizard, a list designed just to sell books,
Right. And I think because those were not designed to be published necessarily, people are not as self-conscious about them. They're not as precious about it. So they're not worried. Like, what are people going to think if I put, this weird thing as my 98th pick? They're just like, I don't care. Like, just let me put. And I think that makes it better. It's a better reading experience. So
it's exactly.
And I think it helps the voting as well. So
exactly what I wanted. I wanted everyone to be honest about their choices, and not worry about, well, I look like an idiot if I don't put Watchmen number one. Don't worry about that. You want
the raw and filter just directly. What do you think?
Gore agrees with you about Zuli's TMNT being fantastic.
It's unbelievable.
Well, Chris, anything else you want to get off your chest?
I was trying to I was trying to think anyone else who got left off the list. I was a little sad about. Gene Colin, I think, is an incredibly talented penciler, and I don't think he ended up with anything on the list. That was maybe the only thing I could think of.
I don't know.
I love his Dr. Strange.
I mean, he's most known for Tomb of Dracula. I don't think his Daredevil stuff, the writing wasn't strong enough for anyone to really care about it.
Right. And a couple of those other guys, like I don't know if we had any Wally Wood on there. There's a few other guys who are incredible draftsmen, but I thank you for asking me to be a part of the project. It was a ton of fun, and it's been really fun reading the issue as well and reading everyone's blurbs and thoughts on it. And and I would recommend, if anyone's interested in not even if what it's not even necessarily the discovery process, but just reading all the reviews, the capsule reviews of every single item. To me, that was one of the biggest joys of reading the issue.
I'll show this here for anyone who might not have seen. It's modeled on the old Comics Journal list. So, 2 to a page for most of the list. And then as we got to the top 10, we went 1 to a page. But there's full write-ups on every single title from 100 on down, leading all the way up to the number 1 Watchmen write-up, which I thought was really spectacular. I've already shouted out Brad on a couple of these videos, but Brad Curry wrote about Watchmen. I think he did a hell of a job.
Brad did an incredible job on that.
But I think, just random titles that someone took some time, thought about it, put some words together, and I agree with you. It was a real pleasure for me to read, because I had no idea what people were going to say. So everyone did great work on these, and I'm not just saying that because it's my publication, quote unquote. I'm saying it because people just turned in really good work, and the love really shows through. People trying to make an argument for what makes a title they believe in an important title, which is what was so kind of life-changing for me about that old journal list. That list, there was tons of stuff I'd never heard of, never read. Most people will have heard of most of these comics, I think. But maybe it'll make you look at something a little differently too.
And whenever Damien gets out of jury duty, I'm very much looking forward to hearing your talk with him. Hopefully that gets arranged, because yeah, I love Sleepy Reader for years, and interested to hear what he has to think about all this stuff.
Same here. I look forward to that too. Well, Chris, thanks for coming on here and talking about this. Thanks to everybody who's in the chat, especially Gore and Damien, who were and Chris, Chaos and Comics, the main commenters. Everybody out there, have a good night. And thanks for watching.